Hi, my name is Eleanor Matthews. I'm 52 years old, and for the past 6 winters, I've lived alone in a small wooden house tucked away at the edge of Willow Creek, a tiny mountain town in Colorado where the snow arrives early and lingers long after the calendar says spring. People say winter here is beautiful, and they're right, at least on the days when the sun catches the frost on the pines and turns the whole valley into a field of diamonds. But beauty and loneliness, they can live side by side. I've learned that. My husband, David, passed away from a sudden heart attack when he was just 48. One minute we were planning a summer trip to Yellowstone. The next I was standing in a hospital corridor staring at a doctor's lips moving, but hearing nothing. After that, the house felt like an echo chamber. Every creak in the floorboards reminded me of him. Every chair at the table looked too empty. Our son, Michael, stayed for a while, trying to help me adjust, but he was young, with dreams bigger than this small town. When he got an offer to work in Boston, I told him to go, and I meant it. He needed to live his life. I promised him I'd be fine. Since then, my days have settled into a quiet rhythm. Mornings start with coffee by the kitchen window, watching the fog lift off the snow-covered meadow. I tend to my little greenhouse, my sanctuary. In winter, it glows warm against the gray sky, full of bright geraniums and tiny sprigs of rosemary. Out here, growing something green feels like a small act of defiance against the cold. Afternoons, I might bake a loaf of bread, the smell of yeast filling the house. Or I'll sit at my old oak desk, the one David built for me, and write letters to friends I haven't seen in years. Real letters, with envelopes and stamps, not emails. I like the slow, deliberate nature of it. In the evenings, I light the fireplace, curl up with a book, and let the hours slip by to the sound of the wind moving through the pines. Life isn't exciting, but it's steady. And for a long time, that's all I thought I wanted. No surprises, no changes, nothing that could shake the fragile balance I'd built. But balance has a way of shifting whether you're ready or not. It started on a Saturday afternoon in early December. Snow had been falling since morning, thick and heavy, muting every sound in the valley. I was in the kitchen pulling a tray of oatmeal cookies from the oven when the phone rang. The old landline crackled, as it always does when the weather's bad. I glanced at the caller ID. Margaret, my sister. Margaret and I aren't exactly close. We grew up in the same house, but as adults we drifted. She stayed in Denver, working in real estate, always busy, always moving. We'd talk maybe once every few months, usually on holidays or birthdays. So, a call from her on an ordinary Saturday was unusual. I picked up. Hello? Her voice came through shaky, almost breathless. Ellie, I need you to do something for me. I set the cookie tray down, my stomach tightening. What's going on? I can't explain everything right now, she said quickly, but I need you to take Lily for a while. I frowned. Take Lily? What do you mean, take? There was a sudden sound on her end, like a door slamming, and then her voice dropped to a whisper. Just promise me you'll keep her safe, and don't ask too many questions right now, please. Before I could respond, the line went dead. I stared at the phone, trying to process what had just happened when I heard it. 3 sharp knocks at the front door. The house is set back from the road and visitors are rare, especially in weather like this. I walked to the door, heart pounding, and opened it. There, standing on the porch with snow dusting her dark hair, was Lily, my 17-year-old niece. She was clutching a faded canvas duffel bag, her cheeks red from the cold, her eyes wide and uncertain. "Hi, Aunt Ellie," she said softly. "Mom told me to come here." The wind whipped around us, carrying tiny shards of ice that stung my skin. Without another word, I stepped aside and pulled her inside. She stood in the entryway shivering as I helped her slip out of her coat. Her hands were ice cold, I led her to the kitchen and poured her a mug of hot cocoa, the steam curling up into her pale face. "Your mom just called," I said gently. "She didn't explain much." Lily stared into her mug. "She said she had to go away for a little while." "Away where?" She shook her head. "I don't know." There was something in her voice, a mix of fear and resignation, that made me swallow my next question. Instead, I placed a plate of cookies in front of her and watched as she nibbled at one without looking up. I didn't know it then, but that moment, standing in my warm kitchen with the snow falling heavy outside and a scared teenage girl at my table, was the start of a winter I would never forget. A winter that would test the meaning of family, of trust, and of how far you're willing to go to protect the ones you love. And it all began with 3 knocks on my door. The next morning, the snow had stopped, leaving the world wrapped in silence. When I woke, the first thing I noticed was the faint sound of footsteps upstairs. For a moment, I thought I'd dreamed the whole thing. Margaret's call, Lily's sudden arrival. But then I remembered. This wasn't a dream. There was a 17-year-old girl sleeping in my guest room, and her mother had vanished into, well, I didn't even know where. I brewed a pot of coffee and set out a simple breakfast. Scrambled eggs, toast, and a jar of homemade raspberry jam I'd been saving. Lily came down the stairs slowly as if she wasn't sure she was welcome here. Her hair was pulled back in a loose ponytail, and she wore the same sweater from yesterday, its sleeves fraying at the cuffs. "Morning," I said, trying to sound casual. "Morning," she replied, sliding into a chair. She avoided my eyes, focusing instead on the plate in front of her. We ate mostly in silence, the only sounds the clink of forks and the ticking of the old wall clock. After a while, I asked, "Did your mom say anything else? Before she sent you here?" Lily hesitated, then shook her head. "Just that she had to go, and that I'd be safe with you." Safe. The word lingered in the air between us. Safe from what? I didn't press her. Whatever was going on, she clearly didn't have all the answers, or she wasn't ready to share them yet. Instead, I told her about the small routines of life here, how the road into town was icy in the mornings, how the best bakery was open only 3 days a week, how the pines creaked at night when the wind shifted. Little by little, she began to talk. Not about Margaret, but about school, her friends in Denver, and how she'd been on the debate team. Her voice brightened slightly when she mentioned photography. She had an old film camera she loved to use. I made a mental note to dig out David's darkroom equipment from the attic. Maybe giving her something familiar to do would help. Over the next few days, we fell into a tentative rhythm. I'd work in the greenhouse while Lily sat at the kitchen table, sketching or flipping through magazines. Sometimes she'd help me with dinner, chopping vegetables or stirring a pot of soup. At night, we'd sit by the fire, each with our own book, the silence between us no longer uncomfortable. But I could see the worry she carried. It showed in the way she'd glance at the phone whenever it rang, or the way she checked her cell for messages when she thought I wasn't looking. And always, there was that guardedness, like she was keeping a part of herself locked away. On the 4th night, the phone finally rang, and it was Margaret. "Ellie," she said quickly, her voice low. "Is Lily okay?" "She's fine," I replied, though I could hear the edge in my own voice. "Margaret, what is going on? You can't just drop her here and disappear without—" "I can't explain right now," she cut in. "It's not safe." "Not safe? For who?" "For either of us." There was a pause, then, "Please, just keep her there. Don't let anyone take her. I'll call again when I can." And then she hung up. I stood in the kitchen for a long time, staring at the phone. Outside, the wind had picked up again, sending flurries swirling past the window. My sister had always been dramatic, but this felt different. This felt real. That night, I didn't sleep well. I kept replaying her words in my mind. "Don't let anyone take her." The next afternoon, while Lily was upstairs, I decided to make a quick run into town for groceries. The roads were still slick from the storm, and I drove slowly, the tires crunching over packed snow. At Miller's General Store, I was tossing a sack of flour into my cart when I heard someone call my name. It was Tom Hanley, an old family friend and one of the few people I saw regularly. He was a retired sheriff's deputy, broad-shouldered, with a weathered face that seemed to hold both kindness and suspicion in equal measure. "Haven't seen you in a while," he said, leaning on his cart. "How's life out by the creek?" "Quiet," I replied, forcing a smile. We chatted about the weather, the upcoming holiday parade, the usual small-town things, but just as I was about to say goodbye, Tom tilted his head. "Heard there's been some trouble down in Denver," he said. "Any of your folks caught up in that?" My chest tightened. "What kind of trouble?" He shrugged. "Not sure on the details, just that there's been some investigations, people going missing, that sort of thing." I laughed it off, but my mind was racing. Was this connected to Margaret's sudden disappearance? When I got home, the house was quiet. Too quiet. "Lily?" I called. No answer. Panic flared in my chest as I checked the living room, the kitchen, then climbed the stairs 2 at a time. I found her in the guest room, sitting cross-legged on the bed with her camera in her lap. "You scared me," I said, my voice sharper than I intended. "Sorry," she murmured. "I just needed some space." I nodded, forcing myself to calm down. She was here. She was safe. That evening, as we sat by the fire, I asked her if she wanted to decorate for Christmas. Her eyes lit up in a way I hadn't seen before. "Yes," she said quietly. "I'd like that." So we unpacked the boxes from the attic, strings of colored lights, old ornaments David and I had collected over the years, the wooden nativity set he carved one winter when money was tight. As we worked, Lily told me about the Christmases she remembered with her mom. For a little while, the shadows lifted. There was laughter, the scent of pine, and the warm glow of the fireplace. But later that night, as I was turning off the lights, I glanced out the front window and saw it. A single set of footprints in the fresh snow, leading from the road to the edge of my property, and then stopping, just beyond the porch light's reach. Someone had been watching. And suddenly I knew. Whatever Margaret had gotten herself into, it had just arrived in Willow Creek. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about the footprints. They hadn't come from my driveway. They came straight from the road, cutting across the field, stopping just short of the house. Whoever it was hadn't knocked, hadn't called out. They'd just stood there, watching. I tried to sleep, but every creak of the old farmhouse made me sit up in bed. Around midnight, I finally got up, pulled on my robe, and made myself a cup of tea. The house was quiet except for the low hum of the refrigerator. I was halfway through my tea when I heard it. A single, heavy knock at the front door, not the kind of quick, polite tap you'd expect from a neighbor. This was slow, deliberate. For a moment, I couldn't move. My mind went to the footprints, to Margaret's warning, "Don't let anyone take her." The knock came again. I set down my mug, heart thudding in my chest, and went to the door. Through the frosted glass, I could make out the shape of a man, tall, broad shoulders, wearing a dark coat. "Yes?" I called, keeping my voice steady. "Evening, ma'am," the man said. His voice was deep, calm. "Sorry to bother you so late. I'm looking for a young girl, about 17. Goes by Lily. Have you seen her?" My grip tightened on the doorknob. "Who's asking?" "I'm with the county," he said, though he didn't show a badge. "Her mother's concerned. Just trying to bring her home." Everything in me screamed not to open that door. "You'll have to speak to her mother directly," I said firmly. He hesitated, then took a small step closer. "If she's here, ma'am, you'd be doing the right thing by telling me." "I think we're done here," I said, my voice sharper now. A long silence followed. Finally, he stepped back. "All right," he said, "but I'll be back." I didn't move until I saw his shadow retreat down the driveway, disappearing into the dark. When I turned around, Lily was standing at the bottom of the stairs. Her face was pale. Who was that? Just someone looking for directions, I lied. But she didn't look convinced. She came closer, lowering her voice. You can't trust them. If they find me, they'll take me back. Back where? I asked. She shook her head. It's complicated. Mom will explain when she can. I wanted to push for more, but the fear in her eyes stopped me. Instead, I told her to go back to bed. We'd talk in the morning. The next day, I decided to call Tom Hanley. If anyone knew what was going on, it would be him. Footprints? A man in a dark coat? Tom repeated when I told him. Ellie, you should have called me right away. Do you know who he is? Tom hesitated. I've heard about someone matching that description asking around town. Says he's a private investigator from Denver, but something about him doesn't sit right. Private investigator? I repeated. Why would Margaret be hiding from someone like that? Tom's voice softened. Ellie, you know your sister's had her share of trouble. If she's mixed up with the wrong people, it's possible this isn't just about custody or family drama. Could be something bigger. Bigger. The word made my stomach turn. Just keep your doors locked, Tom added, and call me if you see him again. That afternoon, I found Lily in the greenhouse sitting on a wooden stool, her camera in her lap. She was snapping pictures of the frosted glass, the way the light broke through the ice. Want to go into town tomorrow? I asked gently. Might do you some good to get out of the house. She hesitated. Will it be safe? I forced a smile. We'll keep to the main streets, and Tom Hanley will be around. The next day, we drove into Willow Creek. The town was small, just a few blocks of shops, a diner, and the post office. Snow still clung to the rooftops, and the lampposts were wrapped in red and green garlands. At the diner, we shared a slice of warm apple pie. For the first time in days, Lily seemed relaxed. She told me about a photography project she'd done last year. Portraits of people in her neighborhood. When we were heading back to the truck, I noticed a dark sedan parked across the street. A man sat inside, his face half hidden by the brim of his hat. My pulse quickened. I didn't say anything to Lily, but I took the long way home, making sure we weren't being followed. That evening, Margaret called again. Ellie, listen to me, she said urgently. If a man named Carter comes around asking about Lily, you cannot tell him anything. He's dangerous. Margaret, what is going on? Who is he? And what does he want with your daughter? There was a pause on the line. Lily saw something she wasn't supposed to, something that could get people hurt. Carter works for them. If he finds her... Her voice broke. Just keep her safe, please. Before I could ask more, the line went dead. That night, I set an extra chair against the front door and kept the porch light on. I sat in the living room with a blanket, listening for any sound outside. Around 2 a.m., I heard it. The crunch of footsteps on fresh snow. I held my breath. A shadow moved past the window. Then another. And in that moment, I realized Carter wasn't alone anymore. The crunch of footsteps grew louder. I stayed perfectly still in my chair, ears straining. The old farmhouse walls seemed to breathe with me, in, out, as if the house itself was holding its breath. Through the gap in the curtains, I caught a flash of movement. 2 men, both wearing heavy coats, their heads turning as they scanned the windows. One of them I recognized immediately, Carter. The other was younger, leaner, but carried himself the same way, too still, too deliberate. My heart hammered in my chest. I rose quietly, went to the stairs, and called softly, Lily. Within seconds, she appeared at the top, her eyes wide. They're here, I whispered. She froze, her hand gripping the banister so tightly her knuckles turned white. Go to the back room, I said. Stay low. Don't make a sound. As she disappeared into the shadows, I grabbed the cordless phone and dialed Tom Hanley. No answer. I tried again. Still nothing. Outside, the men had reached the porch. Carter stepped forward, rapping his knuckles against the door. Slow, heavy, just like before. Ellie, he called, his voice low but clear. We need to talk. I didn't answer. Another knock, louder this time. "This is your last chance. Hand the girl over and no one gets hurt." The younger man moved to the side of the house, his boots crunching in the snow. I could hear him trying the windows. I backed away from the door, my mind racing. Then my cell phone buzzed in my pocket. It was Margaret. "Ellie," she said before I could speak. "Are they there?" "Yes, both of them. What do they want?" "They think Lily took something from them. A memory card, with photos and documents that prove what they've been doing, corruption, payoffs, and worse. She didn't take it, but they believe she did. If they find her, they'll make sure she can't talk." My stomach turned. "Margaret, what have you gotten us into?" "I'll explain later. Right now, you have to get her out of the house. Use the old root cellar door. It opens out into the field. Tom knows the spot. I'm already on my way." I peered toward the kitchen, picturing the trapdoor under the worn rug. It led to the root cellar, then out through a narrow door that opened into the field behind the house. Another loud bang at the front door snapped me back to the moment. "Ellie!" Carter shouted. "I won't ask again." I hurried upstairs to get Lily. She was crouched in the corner of the back room, clutching her camera. "We're going out through the cellar," I whispered. She shook her head. "If they see us—" "They won't," I cut in. "But we have to move now." We crept down to the kitchen. Every floorboard seemed to groan under our weight. I lifted the rug, revealing the old wooden trapdoor. My hands trembled as I pulled it open, the hinges squealing softly. "Go," I urged, helping Lily down the narrow ladder. Once we were both inside, I shut the trapdoor just as I heard glass shatter in the living room. They were inside now. The root cellar smelled of damp earth and potatoes long gone bad. The air was cold, heavy. I fumbled with the latch on the small exterior door. It stuck at first, swollen from years of disuse, but finally gave way with a sharp pop. We slipped out into the snow. The moonlight was bright enough to see the field stretching ahead, the skeletal trees at its edge. We were halfway across when a shout rang out behind us. "There, in the field!" I grabbed Lily's hand. "Run!" Our boots crunched through the snow, each step heavier than the last. My lungs burned, the icy air stabbing at my throat. Behind us, the pounding of boots grew louder. Then, in the distance, headlights cut through the trees. A truck barreled toward us, tires chewing up the snow. It skidded to a stop, and Tom Hanley jumped out, shotgun in hand. "Get in!" he yelled. We dove into the cab. Lily pressed between us. Tom threw the truck into reverse, spinning it around before flooring the gas. In the rearview mirror, Carter stood in the middle of the field, watching us go, his face unreadable in the moonlight. The younger man was nowhere in sight. We didn't stop until we reached Tom's cabin, tucked deep in the woods. Once inside, Lily sank onto the couch, shaking. Tom locked the door, then turned to me. "You want to tell me what the hell is going on?" I told him everything Margaret had said. His jaw tightened. "Carter's not just some PI," Tom said. "He used to work for a security firm tied to some nasty folks. If Lily really has proof of their crimes, they'll stop at nothing to get it back." Lily looked up. "I told you, I don't have it. I saw them. I saw what they did, and I took pictures. But when I developed the film, those frames were blank, like someone had tampered with it." "Do you still have the negatives?" Tom asked. She nodded slowly. "They're in my backpack, at Aunt Ellie's house." We all fell silent. Going back there now would be dangerous. But without those negatives, there was no proof, nothing to stop Carter from coming after her again. Hours later, Margaret arrived, her hair damp with melted snow. She hugged Lily fiercely, then turned to me. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice cracking. "I never meant to drag you into this." "You've got a lot to explain," I replied. And she did. She told us she'd been working for a nonprofit that tracked corporate environmental violations. One of the companies she'd been investigating had hired Carter's firm for security. But instead of protecting assets, they'd been covering up crimes, dumping chemicals, paying off officials, and silencing anyone who got too close. Lily had stumbled onto a meeting in an abandoned warehouse, snapping photos from the shadows. She didn't know what she had until men started following her. "They think she still has the evidence," Margaret said. "And they're right about one thing. If it ever gets out, they're finished." By the time she finished, the fire in Tom's stove had burned low. Outside, the snow had stopped, the woods still and silent. We knew what we had to do. Tomorrow, we'd go back to my farmhouse, get the backpack, get the negatives, and end this. But deep down, I knew Carter wouldn't just let us walk in and out. And something told me he was already planning his next move. The morning came gray and cold. Frost clung to the cabin windows, blurring the outline of the trees beyond. I sat at the small table, nursing a cup of coffee gone lukewarm, my mind replaying the night's conversation over and over. Tom was already checking his truck, making sure it would handle the icy roads. Margaret sat with Lily on the couch, whispering to her in a voice too low for me to hear. When Tom came back inside, he set his shotgun by the door. "We leave in 10 minutes, he said. Margaret looked at me. "We have to be fast. Get in, grab the backpack, and get out before they know we were there." I nodded, though a knot tightened in my stomach. Something told me Carter would expect exactly that. The drive back to my farmhouse felt longer than it should have. Every bend in the road looked like a trap. Every parked vehicle made me tense. When the house finally came into view, my heart sank. The front door was ajar. Snow had blown into the entryway, scattering across the worn wood floor. "Stay here," Tom said, stepping out of the truck with his shotgun at the ready. Margaret, Lily, and I followed cautiously. Inside, the air was colder than outside, as if the house itself had given up its warmth. The living room was a mess, drawers pulled open, cushions slashed. Whoever had been here wasn't looking for cash or jewelry. They were looking for the same thing we were. Margaret's voice was tight. "Upstairs. Her backpack's in your guest room, right?" I nodded, hurrying toward the stairs. The boards creaked under my boots. In the guest room, the bed had been turned over, the closet doors ripped off their hinges. But there, under the window, sat Lily's backpack. I grabbed it, my fingers numb with cold. From downstairs, Tom's voice boomed. "We've got company!" I spun toward the landing. Through the front window, I saw a black SUV pull into the driveway. Carter stepped out, flanked by the younger man from before. Both were armed. "Go out the back," Tom shouted. We ran for the kitchen, but before we reached the door, it burst open. The younger man stood there, blocking our way. His eyes flicked to Lily. "Hand it over," he said, his voice calm but edged with threat. "No," I said, surprising myself with how steady I sounded. Tom moved between us, shotgun raised. For a moment, no one spoke. The tension in the air was so thick it felt like it might snap. Then Carter's voice came from behind. "Ellie, don't make this harder than it has to be." I turned slowly. He stood in the hallway, gun lowered but ready. "This isn't about you," he said. "Give me the bag and we walk away. You'll never see us again." Lily clutched my arm. "Don't trust him," she whispered. I took a deep breath. "You've been following her for weeks. You broke into my house. You chased us across a field in the middle of the night. Forgive me if I'm not convinced you're going to just walk away." Carter's eyes narrowed. "Last chance." Before I could answer, Tom spoke. "Not today." And just like that, chaos erupted. Tom lunged forward, shoving the younger man aside as he fired a warning shot into the ceiling. Carter swore, raising his gun, but Margaret grabbed a cast-iron skillet from the counter and swung it with surprising force. The crack of metal against Carter's arm made him drop his weapon. "Go!" Tom yelled. We bolted through the kitchen door into the snow, Lily clutching the backpack. My boots slipped on the icy steps, but I kept going. Behind us, Carter shouted orders and the younger man gave chase. We made it to the truck, but before Tom could start the engine, the man slammed into my side, yanking the backpack from Lily's hands. I reacted without thinking, grabbing his coat and dragging him down into the snow. We struggled, my breath coming in sharp bursts. Then I heard Tom's voice, low and dangerous. "Let her go, now." The man froze, glancing up to see Tom standing over us, shotgun aimed squarely at his chest. Slowly, he dropped the backpack and stepped back. We piled into the truck and tore down the driveway, snow spraying in our wake. It wasn't until we were halfway back to the cabin that I dared to open the backpack. Inside, tucked into a side pocket, was a small envelope of negatives. Lily's hands shook as she took them out. "These are the ones. If we can get them developed somewhere safe—" Margaret cut in. "I know a lab in the city that'll do it, quietly. Once we have the prints, we can get them to the right people." Tom grunted. "You'd better do it fast. Those two aren't done with us." 2 days later, we sat around Tom's kitchen table, staring at the developed photos spread out in front of us. The images were clear, painfully clear. Men unloading barrels marked with hazard symbols into a frozen river. Trucks with logos Lily recognized from the warehouse. Carter himself talking to a man whose face was already splashed across news reports about corporate fraud. Margaret gathered them into a folder. "I'm sending these to 3 places at once: the press, the state attorney, and a federal contact. By the time Carter knows, it'll be too late." I watched her seal the envelope. "And Lily?" "She'll be safe," Margaret said firmly. "Once this is public, they can't touch her without making it worse for themselves." The next morning, news broke. Photos, names, and charges flashed across every channel. Carter's face was everywhere. I stood on my porch, watching the snow fall softly over the fields, feeling a strange mix of relief and exhaustion. Lily came out, wrapped in a blanket. "It's over, isn't it?" "For us," I said. "For them, it's just beginning." She smiled faintly. "Thank you, Aunt Ellie, for everything." I pulled her into a hug. "You don't have to thank me. You're family. That's what we do." Somewhere in the distance, a snowplow rumbled down the road, clearing the path for whatever came next. And for the first time in weeks, I felt like maybe, just maybe, we could breathe again. The snow had started to melt by the time things truly quieted down. The driveway that had been a sheet of ice just weeks ago was now streaked with muddy patches. The pine trees outside the cabin shed droplets that sparkled in the late morning sun. I was sitting by the window, a mug of tea warming my hands, when Lily padded in. She was wearing one of Margaret's oversized sweaters, the sleeves nearly covering her hands. "Tom says the truck's fixed," she said, her voice softer than I'd heard it in days. "He's heading into town for supplies." I nodded. "You want to go with him?" She hesitated, then shook her head. "Not yet. I'm not ready to be around strangers." I understood. After everything that had happened, the thought of crowded aisles and curious eyes felt overwhelming. The truth was, even though Carter and his partner were now behind bars, there was still a heaviness in the air. You don't just snap your fingers and erase fear. Margaret joined us a few minutes later, carrying a stack of envelopes. "Letters from folks who saw the story," she explained. "Some are reporters wanting interviews, but most are just people saying thank you, for speaking up, for making noise when it mattered." Lily's eyes flicked to me, and I could see the uncertainty there. "Do we have to answer them?" Margaret smiled gently. "We don't have to do anything, but sometimes letting people know they're heard, it helps them heal too." Lily didn't say anything, but she took one of the envelopes and ran her fingers over it like she was testing its weight. That afternoon, we took a walk down to the edge of the river. The ice had started to break, small cracks revealing the dark water underneath. "This is where it happened, isn't it?" Lily asked quietly. I nodded. She was talking about the photographs, the barrels, the trucks, the proof of what Carter and his people had been doing. For a while, we just stood there, listening to the water move. Then Lily said, "I keep thinking about how, if I'd stayed quiet, maybe they'd still be doing it. Maybe worse." You spoke up, I said. That's what matters. You stood up, even when it scared you. She gave a small, sad smile. I only did it because I had somewhere to run. My throat tightened. And you'll always have that. Here. With me. A week later, Margaret and Lily packed their things to head back to the city. The morning of their departure, I made pancakes, the kind with blueberries pressed into the batter, just the way Lily liked them. Tom came by to help load their bags into his truck. Margaret hugged me first. You've got a quiet strength, Ellie. You may not see it, but the rest of us do. Then Lily stepped forward. She didn't hug me right away. Instead, she pulled a folded piece of paper from her pocket. I wrote this for you, she said. I unfolded it to find a short note, written in her careful, looping handwriting. It said, I don't know if I would have made it without you. Thank you for being my safe place. I hugged her then, holding on a little longer than I probably should have. You'll be okay, I whispered. And if you're not, you know where to find me. After they left, the cabin felt impossibly still. I spent the first couple of days puttering around, fixing a loose cabinet door, sweeping the porch, restacking firewood, anything to fill the quiet. But eventually, the silence stopped feeling heavy. I realized I wasn't holding my breath anymore. I started baking again. Loaves of bread that I shared with neighbors, pies that I left on doorsteps without knocking. People began stopping by more often, not to ask about the news or the photos, but just to sit and talk over coffee. Life had a way of finding its rhythm again. One Sunday morning, I got a call from Margaret. You're not going to believe this, she said, her voice brimming with excitement. Lily's been invited to speak at a community forum next month, about whistleblowers, about doing the right thing. She's nervous, but I think it's going to be good for her. I smiled into the receiver. Tell her I'm proud of her, and that I expect a full report afterward. There was a pause. Then Margaret added, She said she wants you there. She said, It's not the same without you. 3 weeks later, I found myself standing in a small, crowded hall in the city. Lily was up on stage, her hands gripping the sides of the podium. She started out a little shaky, but then her voice grew steadier. She talked about fear, how it can freeze you, but also how it can light a fire under you if you let it. She talked about family, about people who step in when they don't have to. And she talked about home, not the building, but the feeling. When she was done, the applause filled the room. I clapped until my hands ached. That night, back at Margaret's apartment, Lily handed me a small box. For you, she said. Inside was a silver locket. On one side was a photo of the cabin in winter, snow piled high on the roof. On the other was a picture of the two of us on the porch, taken the day before she left. I wanted you to have something to remember this by, she said. I laughed softly, as if I could ever forget. Months passed, the seasons shifted again. Snow to rain, rain to green. The fields outside my farmhouse filled with wildflowers. Carter's trial made headlines for weeks, but eventually even that faded from the front page. People moved on, but for those of us who had lived it, the memory stayed sharp. And that was okay. Some things aren't meant to fade completely. One evening, as the sun dipped low behind the hills, I sat on the porch with a fresh cup of tea. The air smelled of pine and earth. I thought about Lily, about the way she'd walked onto that stage and told her story. I thought about Margaret, steadfast as ever. I thought about Tom, who'd never once hesitated when things got dangerous. And I thought about the river, still flowing, still carrying away the ice of winter, making room for whatever came next. If you strip away the noise and the fear, what's left is simple. We protect the people we love. We stand up when we're called to. And sometimes, even in the middle of the coldest winter, we find reasons to believe in spring. In the end, what we went through wasn't just about danger or secrets. It was about trust, loyalty, and standing by the people who matter most. We faced fear head on, we protected each other, and we proved that family isn't just blood. It's the ones who show up when it counts. You don't need a title to be a parent. You don't need permission to show up. And love, real love, doesn't ask for credit. It simply stays. Thank you for watching. If this story spoke to your heart, please like, share, and subscribe. And always remember, you matter, and your love leaves a mark.